let's talk about expressive completeness. A language is expressively complete just in case it allows us to say everything that we want to say. So for example, suppose we had a language that has only one word, the word cat. That language would not be expressively complete since it would only allow us to point to cats. It wouldn't allow us to say, for example, that the sun is shining or that today is Monday, and so on and so forth. So expressive completeness is an important virtue of a language. And we are going to show that TFL, the language we are using in this class, is in fact expressively complete. Let's start with a somewhat different but closely related question. So TFL has 5 connectives: the negation sign, the conjunction sign, the disjunction sign, the conditional, and the biconditional. Now you may wonder, why these 5 connectives? Why didn't we choose fewer connectives or more connectives? When we constructed TFL, why did we settle on these 5 connectives and not a different set? Now, the fact is that some of the TFL connectives really are redundant. In particular, we could eliminate every occurrence of a biconditional using only the conditional and the conjunction sign. And we could eliminate every occurrence of a conditional using only the disjunction and the negation sign. And we could also eliminate every occurrence of a disjunction using only the conjunction and the negation sign. I'm going to explain why each of these 3 claims is true in just a second. Now, but what that means is that instead of having 5 conditionals, we could in principle have a language with only 2 connectives, the negation and the conjunction sign, and we would still be able to express exactly the same truth conditional contents that we are able to express using TFL. Let's see why and how we could in principle eliminate the biconditional. Here you see the joint truth table for the 2 sentences A if and only if B, and if A then B, and the sentence if A then B and if B then A. So to be fully precise, we should put brackets around these 2 sentences. Now we see that the column under the main connective of these 2 sentences exhibits the exact same pattern of T's and F's. The biconditional A if and only if B is true when both A and B are true, and it is also true when both A and B are false, and it is false if only one of the 2 sentences is true. Now, the exact same evaluation also applies to the second sentence. The conjunction sign here is the main connective, and you can see that the conjunction if A then B and if B then A is true in exactly the same scenarios as the biconditional A if and only if B. Now, since in TFL, what we mean by meaning is the truth conditional meaning of a sentence, it follows that these 2 sentences have the exact same meaning. They are true in the same situations, and that means that they have the same truth conditional content. And that means that instead of saying A if and only if B, we could always say if A then B and if B then A. Now this second sentence is somewhat longer, and so it's more convenient to say A if and only if B. But that doesn't change the fact that these 2 sentences really have the same truth conditional content. And that means that we could in principle eliminate every occurrence of a biconditional using only the conditional and the conjunction sign. Similarly, we could also eliminate every occurrence of a conditional using only the negation and the disjunction sign. So here you see the joint truth table for the two sentences if A then B and not A or B. And you can see that the pattern of T's and F's under the main connective of these two sentences is exactly the same. So if A then B is false, just in case A is true and B is false, and in all other cases this sentence is true. And the disjunction not A or B is also false in case A is true and B is false, and true in all other cases. So the two sentences if A then B and not A or B have the same truth conditional meaning. And so that means that instead of saying if A then B, we could always say not A or B. And so we could in principle eliminate every occurrence of a conditional using only the negation and the disjunction sign. So in principle, we could do without the conditional. Now, similarly, we could furthermore eliminate the disjunction sign by using only negation and conjunction signs. Here you see the joint truth table for the two sentences A or B, and it is not the case that not A and not B. The main connective of A or B, of course, is the disjunction sign, and the main connective of the second sentence is the negation sign, which negates the conjunction within the brackets. And you can observe that the pattern of T's and F's under these two connectives is exactly the same. It's T, 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 F. And so that means that these two sentences have the same truth conditional meaning. And instead of saying A or B, we could always say it's not the case that not A and not B. And so we could, in principle, eliminate the disjunction sign. Now, what we have just seen is that instead of using 5 connectives, we could instead use just 2 connectives, the negation and the conjunction sign, and we would still be able to express all the same contents. So that means that TFL is in fact redundant. Now, as a side remark, we could in fact alternatively eliminate the conjunction sign in favor of the disjunction sign and make do with a language that uses only negation and disjunction. But we will not prove that here. I'm just telling you that fact. Now, we are using 5 instead of 2 connectives simply because it allows us to express some contents more easily using fewer symbols. So this is a choice made purely for convenience. Now let's consider the reverse question. We said we are not using fewer connectives as a matter of convenience, but why don't we introduce additional connectives? Why don't we use 7 or 10 connectives instead of the 5 that we have? Now the short answer to this question is that additional connectives would not increase our expressive power. What that means is that even with additional connectives at our disposal, we would not be able to express any contents that we are not already able to express. Now, to prove this point rigorously, we would need to look at connectives that take 1 sentence as argument, connectives that take 2 sentences as argument, connectives that take 3 sentences as arguments, and so on and so forth. So to prove this point rigorously would take a lot of time and be very cumbersome. So instead of giving you a rigorous proof, I will here only look at a 2-place connective and make a few illustrative remarks. So suppose we introduced a new 2-place connective, and let's just suppose we represent this connective by means of the $sign. So let's suppose the $sign combines with two sentences, for example A and B, in order to form a complex sentence, $AB. Now, why don't we do that? Why don't we use the dollar sign in that way? Well, the answer is that there are 16 possible truth tables for such a new two-place connective. And one of these 16 possible truth tables would need to be able to capture the meaning of $AB. We will look at these 16 truth tables on the next slide. Now, but it can be shown that for each of these 16 truth tables, we already have a TFL sentence with that truth table. And that means that $AB is redundant. So here are the 16 possible truth tables for a two-place connective, or a connective that takes two sentences as argument to deliver a complex sentence. To the left here, we have our reference column. For the two atomic sentences A and B. And then to the right, you got all the different possible evaluation columns for any possible two-place connective $AB. And just going through all the different logical possibilities shows us that there are 16 possible truth tables for such a two-place connective. So let's look at the first column here. So this is one possible truth table for a two-place connective. What this column here tells us is that $AB is true in any possible scenario. It's true when both A and B are true. It's also true when A is true and B is false. It's true when A is false and B is true. And it is true when both A and B is false. So that would be a possible truth table for the two-place connective $AB. The second row here illustrates a different possible truth table for the sentence $AB. This second column tells us that $AB is false when A and B are both true, and true in all other valuations, true on all other possible valuations. And similarly for any of the further columns here. Each one of these columns represents one possible truth table for the sentence $AB. And now the fact is that for each of these truth tables, we already have a TFL sentence with that truth table. And that means that $AB is redundant. Let's look at the first possible truth table for $AB to illustrate why the dollar sign is redundant. So suppose that this here was, in fact, the truth table for $AB. So meaning, suppose that $AB is true on every possible valuation of A and B. Now, in that case, $AB would have the same truth conditional meaning as the tautology A or not A. To see why, we can just quickly write up the truth table for A or not A, which looks like this. If A or not A, now not A is true if and only if A is false. And so we see that A or not A is true in every possible situation. Now, since given our assumptions, $AB is true on exactly the same valuations as A or not A, instead of saying $AB, we could always say A or not A. And that means that we can, in principle, eliminate every occurrence of the dollar sign by means of A or not A. And that means that if, in fact, this highlighted truth table here was the truth table of $AB, then the dollar sign would be redundant. Now, to complete our proof, we would need to go through all of the 16 truth tables, so look at the remaining 15 truth tables, and show for each of these truth tables that TFL already contains a sentence with that truth table. We are not going to do that here, and I just ask you to take my word for it. Let's sum up. We saw that TFL is redundant. We could, in principle, eliminate 3 of the 5 connectives. And the only reason why we don't do that is convenience. More connectives allow us to express some contents more easily. Now, however, adding additional connectives would not increase our expressive power. Meaning, additional connectives would not allow us to express any contents that we are not already able to express.